My name is Robert Kirkpatrick. I direct Global Pulse, which is an innovation lab at the United Nations. I'm going to talk to you today about big data and how it can make the world a better place. So back in April of 2010, you might remember the volcano with the amazing name of Eyjafjallajökull. This thing took off in Iceland, shut down air traffic all across Europe for weeks on end. I had colleagues, you probably did too, who were stranded in Paris for weeks at a time, couldn't get back to work. But what you may not know about the volcano is that 4 days after it erupted and covered Europe, more than 5,000 farmhands across Kenya lost their jobs. And there's no social safety net in Kenya when these people lose their jobs. The reason for this is it turns out Kenya sells 500 tons of fresh flowers to Europe every single day. We live in a hyperconnected age. This is a very different world than the UN is used to working in. And all of the connectivity, here you see scientific research collaborations, migration, global trade, and of course the social graph of Facebook. All of these connections have interconnected our economies and our markets and our societies in ways that are so complex we no longer understand them. What happens now is a shock can ripple around the world and begin affecting people very quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, there's been tremendous benefit from these technologies. The internet revolution gave us a nervous system for the planet. And then came the mobile revolution, which helped to accelerate the closure of the digital divide and bring communications and the ability to search the internet for information to millions of people around the world. And then came the social media revolution. The word revolution there is a little tricky. It doesn't just sound like a metaphor. There's something more going on there. It's a testament to the power of collective awareness in driving collective action. But another consequence of these changes is that the world changes faster now, and it creates new risks. An economic crisis can move as fast as a cloud of hot ash. And what we've discovered in the process is that our traditional tools for tracking the impacts of crises on populations can't keep up. Our household surveys, our statistics. Our job is to find out where people are in trouble and what they need and help them. But this is all too slow. And what we're finding more and more is that by the time we know what's happening, it's already happened. The opportunity to reach out and help has passed us by and the harm is done. So what happened to those farmers in Kenya after they lost their job? What happened to their families? How could we find out faster in the next crisis?
Let's start with a story about a woman who, due to an international financial crisis, loses her job. And although she searches for something new, the sacrifices begin to build up. First, she feels the pinch at the market, as rising prices leave her unable to afford staple foods. Then, she loses the ability to pay back her loans. When a family member gets sick, she can't pay for medical treatment. And although she uses her mobile phone to look for work, there are no opportunities to be found. And finally, as her savings dry up, she slips beneath the poverty line. In times of crisis or global shock, this story is repeated hundreds of thousands of times each day, changing people's lives, often for the worse. And the biggest problem is that the true effects of a global crisis only become clear years later through statistics, studies, and census data, when the damage is already done. But today, something has changed. Increasingly, a vast number of households have access to mobile phones. Even in the developing world, people use phones for checking market prices, banking, accessing medical information, and looking for work. And when they do, a digital signal is created in real time. When aggregated, these signals tell a compelling story about how populations are coping in times of stress. For example, The ways in which people add money to their mobile phone accounts can be an indicator of economic well-being. And billions of online food prices can signal price spikes and food shortages at the earliest stages. Meanwhile, publicly shared information on social networks can reveal topics of concern and how people feel about job prospects or their future. And analysis of internet searches can help public health officials detect outbreaks of diseases like the flu or cholera faster than ever before. These new digital signals provide information faster than any survey or census. Once properly anonymized and analyzed, these signals are a powerful tool that provide the ability to understand changes in a population's well-being in real time. Which is why at Global Pulse, together with UN agencies, governments, and local communities, we are innovating to learn how digital signals can be used to strengthen international development so that we can make better decisions, understand what is happening while it is still happening, get real-time feedbacks about whether our policies and programs are working, and respond sooner while there's still time to act.
So a brief summary of what we're working on at Global Pulse. So this is the age of big data. Our digital lives have turned us all into prolific producers of data, and we hear these astonishing statistics again and again. There was more data created in 2011 alone than in all of the rest of human history combined back to the invention of the alphabet. As we go about our lives, as we buy and sell goods, as we search for information, as we transfer money, as we share our minute-by-minute experiences with friends and family on social networks, we create data. What's fascinating here for the UN is that this isn't just happening in the developed world, it's happening in developing countries. In West Africa, in Senegal last year, mobile growth was more than 600%. And people are using those mobile phones to access Facebook. Facebook in Senegal is adding 100,000 users a month. India is now the second largest user of Facebook in the world. Brazil is now the second largest user of Twitter in the world. In Kenya, there's a service called M-Pesa that allows you to transfer money through mobile phones using only SMS. There was more money transferred in Kenya through M-Pesa last year than through all of Western Union worldwide. And this data is being used by companies to understand their customers in real time, to track market trends. So we're asking at the UN, if you can understand your customers in real time, why can't we harness the power of big data to understand when people are losing their jobs, when they're getting sick, when they're struggling to afford food or medicine or clothing or shelter? What we do know is that there are patterns in that data, and that when people's needs change, they change how they use all the digital services in the cloud. And those changes leave patterns as well. So think about it. We've spent the last decade investing trillions of dollars in building the cloud, all of these services now linked to mobile phones all over the world. We have the possibility here of transforming all of these different services that people use to get what they need in their daily lives into a kind of an array of sensor networks that can tell us when communities are in trouble anywhere in the world while there's still time to act. Of course, there are many questions here that still need to be answered. What patterns do we look for in the data? What tools do we need? What kinds of data should we be looking at? How do we do any of this without being able to fully protect individual privacy? So what Global Pulse is doing is functioning as a lab. We bring together experts in academia, private sector corporations with data, with tools that can work with us together with civil society to do experiments, to learn by doing what kinds of data, what kinds of tools, what kinds of analysis can be helpful for understanding when people are in trouble. Actually, we're building a network of labs around the world in developing countries, beginning in Uganda and Indonesia this year. So I want to share with you a little of the research that we've been doing into big data. All of these experiments you're going to see were with open data. The first is, we've been seeing a lot of food crises. And so we know that a lot of people around the world advertise prices online. So we thought, what if we look at online advertising and e-commerce sites all over the world and pull prices off of those sites? How representative are those prices of what people actually experience when they buy food on the street? We looked at bread prices in 6 countries in Latin America. And what we found is pretty interesting. These are the bread price inflation statistics you can see through 2011 in these 6 countries. How representative is this in, say, a country like Uruguay? Well, it turns out it's pretty representative. The gray bars are the official statistics that come out only at the end of each month after being collected at great expense across the country. What you see in the blue line is what you can pull out in real time from the web. This could completely change our ability to detect food price spikes quickly and respond to protect people before the harm is done. Then we wanted to know what social media could tell us about unemployment. We know that when people are going to lose their jobs, they know beforehand, right? Everybody knows there's something up at the office. The question was, do they talk about work differently online in public when that happened? Pretty interesting. We looked at Ireland. And what you see using sentiment analysis, a tool that's used for brand perception monitoring, is that 5 months before people say online, I lost my job, you see a spike in anxiety in their conversations about work. 2 months later, you see a spike in confusion, and then they lose their jobs. And a couple of months after that, you see an increase in conversations around people canceling travel plans. What's interesting here, we also looked at the US. It's different. We're different here. We don't talk differently about work in terms of confusion or anxiety. We get angry or depressed, and it's 4 months before. After they lose their jobs in the US, people start talking about downgrading their housing and then switching to public transportation. It's fascinating. And again, it's different. Every country may be different. We need to learn to listen to these signals in each context. And then we looked at Indonesia. Indonesia's the 3rd largest user of Twitter on the planet. They tweet all day long. There's a movie playing in Jakarta now that has a hashtag for a name. It's #Republic Twitter. It's a love story, romantic comedy. My Bahasa's a little sketchy, but I'm going to try to see it if I can. But we wanted to know if Indonesians tweet about food in ways that could be useful for tracking food crises. Indonesia's prices of rice have been going up after the floods in Thailand, where they buy a lot of rice. This is Ramadan. Right? At the beginning of the fast, people are talking a lot about food. And at the end, they're happy. No need to talk about food. Okay, but can we do something actually useful with this? Well, it turns out that if you do nothing more than count the number of tweets about the price of rice in Indonesia on a daily basis, you can pretty closely approximate the official food price inflation statistics. The signals are out there. The opportunity is real. We're now getting involved in research in Indonesia on the ground to start applying some of these techniques to solve problems. But let's step back for a second. What could real-time information do for global development? My background is software, and I think there's an analogy to learn from the software world. We've got some techies in the audience. How many of you remember waterfall? If we have a few hands up. So in the old days of software development 20 years ago, we used to build software using a method called waterfall. Basically, you spend 6 months understanding your market, you spend a year designing your product, you spend a year building your product, maybe you spend a year testing your product, and then increasingly we found to our horror that the customers who had wanted that original product don't want it anymore if they've gone elsewhere. We built the wrong thing because it took so long. So 10 years ago, people started doing something different. They started using Agile. Agile software development is about rapid prototyping, little iterations of a week. You build a few features, you test them out with your customer, you get feedback, you adapt, you change, and you add it and grow it and extend the product over time. Now, it doesn't necessarily get you there faster, but what it gets you at the end is a product that you know your customers want because they've been with you from the whole journey. You've had real-time feedback from them all the way along. So we find ourselves wondering, could we do agile global development? Could we use real-time feedback from our beneficiaries, not only to tell us what they need, but to tell us when what we're doing isn't working in real time, so that we could adapt and change how we work? Because right now, the work of international development is in waterfall. We use 3-year-old statistics to make a 5-year plan, and then we find out at the end of it, it didn't work the way we hoped. It's not necessarily that we made a bad plan. It's that the world changes too fast now, and the reality for which that plan was developed no longer exists. We think that feedback loops and iterations are going to be key. This is actually the way public health works. You know, US CDC looks for people not coming into work, not coming into school, buying more of certain drugs, showing up with certain symptoms in the clinic, and they say, maybe we've got a disease outbreak. When those anomalies appear, it triggers an investigation that eventually gets you a faster response. So we think, imagine if in a drought-stricken country, in one part of the country, you see people who normally put $10 a month on their mobile phone cards shift to 50 cents every few days. And then they begin defaulting on repaying their loans. And then you see flows of money transfers coming from the capital to that area as they're getting help from relatives. If we saw those signals coming in, could we then reach out to community health workers, to teachers, to radio station hosts in those communities and ask, is there anything going on? What do you need? Could this get us to a more agile and adaptive approach? We think so. But there's one final point here. There's a lot of data out there that you've seen, in these research projects that, is available on the open web. Social media, online prices, news. You can mine this data, but some of the most valuable data out there isn't available on the open web. This stuff is like dark matter in the galaxy, right? The physicists tell us it's out there, but if we look out through a telescope, we can't see it because it doesn't shine back at us. But 2/3 of the galaxy, we can't see. There's data being collected behind firewalls all over the world, and it's some of the most valuable data imaginable. This is the data on consumption. This is the data on transactions that could tell us in real time when people don't have as much money as they used to. So we've started engaging with some of the largest companies in the world around an idea we call data philanthropy. It's a provisional name, but the idea is pretty straightforward. We're asking companies whether they could share from the private sector side some of the data that powers their business so that public sector could understand when people are in trouble. Now, there are many forms this could take. Maybe it's pooling data in industries in a real-time data commons. Maybe it's mining data behind firewalls for patterns we tell them to look for and then alerting us when they show up. But it's been fascinating because as we engage with these companies, they don't see this as corporate social responsibility. They actually recognize that this is a terrible business environment. And if your customers that you're planning to have as customers for the next decade fall back into poverty because no one knew they were in trouble until it's too late, and the signals that could have prevented it were in your data all along, it's in your business interest to mitigate risk by finding a way to share that, provided you can do it without compromising privacy or your own competitiveness. So we're looking for partners. We're looking to build a consortium this year of companies that have data, that have expertise, that have technologies that could be useful here to help us chart a way forward. And if you're interested in getting involved, we're at unglobalpulse.org, and we'd love to talk to you. Thank you.